Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, this is Christina Lopez. I'm an enrollment strategy leader and founder of the Dean's Desk. I spent 20 years in admissions and financial aid, most recently as Dean of Enrollment Management at Barnard College, with previous roles at New York University. Today, I help families evaluate the true financial fit of every college on their students' list before they apply.
I'm Hillary Dickman, a parent of two and Senior Assistant Director of Admission at Colorado College.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good morning, friends. I'm excited about today's episode, as I'm always excited to meet with you, my cyber friends, our listening family. We've got this unique parasocial relationship, and I'm all for it. I'm here for it, and I love it. So, friends, sometimes I call an audible. So we're doing a YouTube series on frequently asked questions, and Hillary and I had recorded a segment for YouTube. But I try to listen to you guys, and I was on a podcast recently, and they asked me, what's the most frequently asked question that I get as a college counselor? And my response was, how many colleges should I apply to? That is the number one question I get. So that second most common, is it better to get a B in a hard class or an A in an easy class? Those are the two most questions I get. Another counselor might be different. However, in this last week, the most frequently asked question that I have received is, why are so many colleges getting rid of their college-specific essays, their custom prompts, their subs? Why? And so when I hear that, I know there's an appetite for that. And this content scheduled to run mid-September on YouTube, I thought we'd bring it over here. So you're going to hear Hillary and I have a discussion about that. And then I'm just giving you a little fast forward a couple weeks ahead. I also did a recording with Chris Tier. There's a new article out that a number of you sent to me as well. It's on Caltech and how they're using a fraud squad to make sure people aren't cheating on their extracurriculars, essays, and things like that. And so the conversation came up again with Chris. Why are these colleges dropping these? So you're going to hear that in 2 weeks. So you can get a double dose on this question. So that's the first segment, in today's episode. Then I do have an admissions tip, an admissions vernacular, and a big number for you. Another YouTube update. And then part 2 of 3, where Christina joined me to interview Andrea Saadi. And Andrea is a municipal credit research analyst. And we have a conversation about how do you assess whether or not a college is financially struggling or financially stable. If you heard last week's, it's a continuation of that conversation. But without any further ado, let's transition to my question from a listener, frequently asked question with Hillary. What's going on out there? Why is everybody making it a lot easier to apply to? Let's listen.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hillary, we have another trend in college admissions that I'm noticing, you're noticing. We're going to talk about it today. And that trend is more colleges are getting rid of their custom prompts. Most people call them supplementals, college-specific essays, pick your term. And tell me your thoughts on that. I know you've observed it. It'd be kind of impossible to be in admissions and not observe it.
Yeah.
Tell our, listeners, but listeners and watchers, now that we're on YouTube, if you get used to that. Tell them why you feel this is happening. I know there's multiple reasons.
Yeah. So we have seen it. Ours has changed from being required to being optional, but we did have a big debate in our office about whether we should just get rid of it completely, because it's not, I mean, it's part of our review, but it's not like the determining factor in whether or not you're going to be admitted. So you could say it makes more sense just to get rid of it. And we've seen that at a lot of other schools this summer, that they're removing it completely. I think this points to bigger demographic trends, bigger cultural trends, where the number of students who are graduating from high school, number one, is declining. They are interested in applying to more schools, but it's hard to apply to a lot of schools. And so if you want to be on a student's list, you got to make it easy to apply. And then obviously the cultural shift toward trade schools or not getting any kind of degree at all. Those are impacting the number of applications that most schools get. We are seeing a decline. And so you want to make it as easy as possible for students to apply to your school. And we know for sure, the data tells us that when you have fewer barriers to applying, and a required supplemental essay is a barrier to applying, the more barriers you have, the more that's going to impact your applicant pool in a negative way. So when you got rid of the supplemental essay, your applications should increase the next year.
So let me ask you this, because I agree 100% with every single thing you said, but there are a couple other reasons why I feel this is happening. And so I'm curious in your mind, and I'm putting you on the spot here, and it's just your opinion, but if you were to like apportion what percentage you think is one reason versus another. So that's a major reason, right? More competitive out there. It is a fact. We both know. I can't tell you, I'm on the counseling side now, how many times people will say, oh, there's no additional essay. I may as well apply. I kind of like it. And I've even shared a story on the podcast of somebody who went through a very competitive process and ended up at one of those schools and would have never ended up. They even told me they literally just threw in an app because there was no app fee and no essay. So that's just a fact. But a couple other reasons. One is there's so much use of AI, parents, independent counselors, that people's fingerprints are all over it, and how much of it really is the student work. So that's one other reason. Another reason is it's rooted in what you said. Kids are applying to more, which means more volume, and we're not increasing our staff. And so if we want to have some semblance of work-life balance, it's one way to keep the workload a little bit in check and make it a little bit easier on us on the application file reading side.
Especially if you're not relying on the supplement as a important part of the decision, then like, why are you doing it? Why are you spending 3 minutes reading it and evaluating it? It doesn't make sense.
I mean, take a look at some of the schools that have dropped theirs, just in the last year. UVA, UNC, UGA, Georgia Tech, Tulane, Miami. Like, these are schools that are not hurting for applications. So,
but I wonder how high quality. The other thing is that supplements tend not to be a super high quality piece of writing. Students, I think, wait until the last minute too often to write their supplemental essays. And then they're speeding through it on Halloween night after they get home from like a Halloween party and turning it in on November 1st. And you can tell. And so it's not helping you determine. I mean, maybe it is helping you if you find one where the student really put a lot of time and effort into it. But if many of them are not high quality, or they're AI, or they're overcoached, then like, what's the point of having it?
Those other two reasons I mentioned, do you think they are definitely contributing factors to schools dropping them?
I think it could be, for sure. When I think back to our responses last fall, there were some that were very clearly written by AI. And we knew after reading a couple, because they all followed the exact same sort of rhythm and sort of outline. One of my colleagues was, I think she was at College Horizons and another conference recently. And she said she was having this conversation with some other reps. And she was talking with reps who had switched from a single supplement to a couple of short answer questions. And they're supposed to be like 100 characters. Right. And their reasoning was that a kid is unlikely to get overcoached or to use AI to answer a question that's only 100 characters. And so then you're getting a more authentic answer from the student. So I think that's another alternative that a school could offer if they're running into the sort of problem of AI. And it makes sense to me that would be a more authentic option. I haven't heard schools say that they're completely getting rid of their supplements because of AI, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a reason.
Yeah, you have heard certain things, right? Like Duke was one of the schools that came out and said they're no longer reading them as an indication of student quality of writing. And they're strictly reading it for messaging, and that was both AI and tampering from others. And then Sean at Tulane, I saw him on a panel, and it was interesting because someone had asked the question, is it true that the writing is not as influential as it once, Sean Abbott, I'm talking about the VP of Enrollment and Dean of Admission at Tulane. Is it true that the writing is not as influential as it once was? And he was like, yeah, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I'm not getting as much value out of it. I'm just not, and then that was interesting. That was like the year before they dropped. I noticed Georgia, and Georgia's not been hurting for applications. Like they really have taken advantage, been on the Common App. They've had success, they've had success, of course, with their national football, and they just sort of have a lot of, they got a lot of things going for them. So that's a place that's been on the ascendancy with applications. And and I've talked to them. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, they didn't like their additional question. Then they switched and they liked it quite a bit. Then David Graves came out and said, we're not finding we're getting that much value out of it. So I think, there are different reasons for different schools. In the case of UVA, they literally had a question on there about your family connections to the school. And then there was a really controversial about legacy. So that was originally why they dropped it, because they said, that was their stated reason. And I was talking to somebody pretty high up off the record. So I think there was probably some truth to that. So like there can be different reasons why it's out there, but there's no doubt. I think the main one is what you're saying. Yeah. And then, and I think you'll agree with this. I think it's exacerbated and accelerated by the fact that you're seeing your competitors go there.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
It becomes
because even Georgia Tech just dropped it this year after UGA did.
Yeah.
Georgia Tech changed
because they know that they're going to have a lot of overlap from in-state students who are applying to both. And if one is easier to do than the other, maybe they just do the UGA application instead of Georgia Tech.
Rick Clark is really transparent. Like UGA had, they had an early action notification date. You probably know they notify people late November, which most people don't do. Yeah. And Rick has publicly said that Rick's over Georgia Tech's office. Georgia Tech lost people because of that. Like they ended up moving their date up, and now both of them do an in-state notification earlier and an out-of-state later. But the point is, schools watch, like when your competitor's doing something that's giving them an edge.
Mm-hmm. You have to respond.
The more people that do it, right? The more why do you have one? I'm just saying that in general. Like you're going to get that question. Like it's really interesting because you'll talk to another group of schools who swear by them and feel like it's an incredibly important component of the application. And they'll often say they get more out of that than the personal statement. And so they're very writing heavy schools that, there's some that I'd be pretty surprised if they move away from it. It's always been a really core component.
Yes. A school with a very strong personality. Like it's really hard for me to imagine the U Chicago application without their goofy questions, right?
Yeah.
That is.
But like, Georgetown I don't see Georgetown getting rid of questions, completely. Yeah. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I think in the background of all these other reasons that we're talking about is also enrollment managers or enrollment leaders are picturing in their head the graph that they're seeing of their apps declining, even if they've been on the upswing. There are still fewer students who want to go to college. Fewer students, period, and fewer students who want to go to college. And as an enrollment leader whose work life depends on you enrolling a full class, you see that in the back of your mind these days all the time. Like every decision that you're making, you're picturing the graph of the projections that your consultants have shown you and saying, what can I do to head this off? Because those projections are, if you do nothing to change your application process or your marketing or whatever, this is how we see it going. And then it's going to bounce back in 2031 or whatever. And they got to head that off. And so no matter what the other reasons are, that's always in your mind. And it's sort of the foundation of your decision-making at this moment in time.
And another thing, this probably isn't going to surprise you what I'm going to say, Hillary, but so many times when I talk to senior level admissions people, they feel as if the board that they report to just does not get it. They feel they are completely, I hear this all the time. And so the reason why I bring this up is because is something I like to point out to students. Even if you're super selective and there's no question you're going to be full, the people that you report to are not going to celebrate you because you're full. All the ways in which they judge you, they're going to want to see evidence that you're moving forward, not backward. So even a more selective school that is no question they're going to meet their class, they still can feel the pressure of, but I got to report to a president, a board, that
drop that admit rate, raise those test scores, enroll more valedictorians. There's always the next thing to reach for.
Correct. And you mentioned a couple. Why is the admit rate going up? Why are the test scores not going down? Why do we not have as many valedictorians or whatever it is? Why do we not have as many? Why do our international numbers go down, or we don't have as many states? There's always something.
Yeah.
So
we need more full pays. Yeah,
more full pay families. So it can it impacts all, no matter where you were in the pecking order of selectivity, it impacts you. Yeah. Good stuff. Thanks, Hillary.
Yeah, it's rough. Yeah. Thank you.
Rough out there.
It is.
All right, friends, that concludes this part of the conversation. As I told you, in a couple weeks, you're going to hear us come back to that again. It's really nestled in the context of us taking a hot topic in the news, which we haven't had for a while, but you'll hear it addressed again. And so we have two perspectives on the same question. But now let's do our admissions tip, our admissions vernacular, and the big number. All right, this is my admissions tip. You really, and when I say you, I'm talking primarily about the class of 2027, right? The rising seniors. Although I really want my class of 2028 to be listening to this as well. So they're taking it in, because you can apply aspects of what I'm going to say right now as well if you're class of 2028. So you want to have a visit strategy for every one of your schools. Every one of your colleges, you should have a visit strategy. So if you go back and look at an interview we did December 19, 2023, called 6 Ways to Visit a College. Marissa Salazar did that interview. We went over the 6 different ways. So let's talk about what they are. But you can listen to that interview. I'd encourage you, because we get into which type of visit makes the most sense for which person. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that one if you haven't heard that one. But let's talk about the 6 visits. Okay. So we have the traditional tour. That's typical information session tour, 2 hours in and out. Of course, you and I know, if you've listened regularly, we talk about how to customize that. But this is not the point to do a deep dive on all these different things. That's what that interview's for. But that's one type of visit, right? Then we have the open house. Much fuller, more fulsome visit. I feel like we need to give you more content on an open house. I'm planning on doing something coming up here on that to go a little bit more in depth into the open house with you. That's the second type of visit, and in fact, Tilly and I said a few things about open houses, so you'll hear a few things on that coming up in a recent episode. When I'm just recording these episodes all the time, I can't remember. Is it YouTube? Is it Audible podcast? When did I do it? Who did I do it? The other day, Susan said to me, I really liked what you said in the episode, and it was literally 2 or 3 days before, and I did not even remember it because I'm just cranking out content. I'm on to the next thing. So you got your open house, okay? And then you also have your self-guided tour, right? That's a third type of visit, right? A fourth type of visit is a virtual visit. Sign up on the website. And I'm not going into all these. You can once again listen to an interview if you're not clear of the difference. Then there's the admitted student program after you've already been admitted. And then in some cases you have the fly-in, which is going to be the rarest one, especially, it just takes a lot of money to have fly-ins, and schools are very intentional about who they fly in. They're really targeting populations that are really difficult for them to attract. So what you want to do right now is take a look at your entire list and map out a strategy, because nobody wants you to show up to a college sight unseen. And you shouldn't want that either. I remember when I was in admissions, and I remember, sometimes that would happen for an international student. And I remember a student I was working with from LA, and she wasn't able to visit. And we ended up admitting her. And I remember being really nervous. Like, is she going to like it when she gets here? Like, admission officers don't like that. And you shouldn't want that either. So what's the visit strategy? What is it? Sit down and plan. Which are the ones you're going to do the traditional tour? Where are you going and when? Which are the ones you're doing open houses to? You can't do too many open houses for lots of different reasons. First of all, do you have a full day? And they're not offered that often. So usually those are priority visits for you. Virtual, a lot easier to do. Self-guided tour, you still got to be able to get there. It's easy if it's local. Still requires a lot of planning if it's hotel, airfare, rent-a-car, meals, if it's not within the local vicinity. Admitted student visit program, nothing wrong with saying, you know what, this school's not a high enough priority or not in a convenient enough location for us to get to it on the front end, but we'll get to it on the back end. And honestly, admitted student visit program, you can't really ever plan that know for sure you're going to get one of those. Not at this time. But what's the strategy? Because you don't want to show up sight unseen. And you also don't want to be the person who had planned to do all the visits on the back end, admitted student visits, and now you're like, snap, I'm in 8 schools and 4 of them overlap on the visit times. And so I can't go to all of them at the same time, only one person, and I have conflicts on some of the other dates. So you got to map out a strategy. So that's my admissions tip for you. It's really important. It's really important because visits are game changers. I say to my students, if you were to take your schools and put them in a list, let's say you had 9 schools, you put them and you rank them strictly according to which one you like the most. And then you visit all 9. I will bet the house that order will shift. So I tell my students, I say, you ever play cards? They always say yes. You ever shuffled a deck of cards? They say yes. I say visiting college is like shuffling a deck of cards. It will reorder your list because visits allow you to capture feel, and feel is very, very important. So that might sound like this subjective, stuff, but it's actually very, very important. So that's my first tip. Admissions, vernacular, correct. Ever talk to admissions officers? Like, think about it. Curriculum. That's 4 syllables. Who wants to say that all the time? Nobody has time to say curriculum every time that word comes up. So you'll hear admission officers amongst themselves just refer to correct. So that's our admissions vernacular. And then our big number, unfortunately, it's a sad one. A survey of 43,000 students from across the country. This study was done by a group called Challenge Success. They're a research-based organization that's affiliated with Stanford. They found that more than 2/3 of high schoolers report being, this is a quote, often or always worried about college admissions. Friends, what are we doing? This is ridiculous. No wonder we have a mental health crisis in this country. Survey of 43,000 students from across the country by Challenge Success, a research-based organization affiliated with Stanford University, found more than 2/3 of high schoolers reported being often or always worried about college admissions. That's why we try to talk a lot about mental health on here. It's why we try to talk a lot about balance. It's why we try to talk a lot about not having this T20 mentality that we're paying such a heavy price for. I was really happy the other day when a listener called in and gave a tribute to Carter and pinpointed his focus on mental health, because all of us who know Carter know that's extremely important to him. And that's one of the reasons we even wanted him on the podcast, but is one of many reasons. But I'm glad to see you're picking that perspective up from him. And hopefully you pick it up from all of us. Like, we really care. And we think there's a lot of insanity out there, and there's a lot of noise. It's having a deleterious impact on our kids. And we're going to fight back. And that's why we're now a daily podcast. 5 days on YouTube, 2 days here, because there's a lot of noise out there that we have to combat. And I think it's ridiculous that a stat like that's even true. And what are we doing in our culture to contribute it? Can be part of the problem or part of the solution. We choose to be part of the problem. All right, friends, a couple YouTube updates. Now that we're a daily podcast, we're going to have a lot of these. So one of the things I said on Monday is I will tell you what YouTube videos will be up for the week. And then I proceeded to tell you all the ones we had in the past, and I didn't tell you the ones for this week. So I'm just going to tell you the 3 that are going to air on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay, so you hear this episode on Thursday. What are the 3 that are going to air on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? If you want some content, you need your little fix through the week. So on Friday, Hillary and I have a Grinding My Gears series. And it's about students' poor communication with colleges. So you're going to want to hear that. So in our Grinding My Gears series, we are either expressing our frustration of behavior students and parents do. You want to listen to that because you want to eschew or avoid this behavior. Like if it is rankling admission officers and counselors, that means it's not landing well, and that means it's a behavior you want to avoid. But we also go off on colleges too. That's more maybe for some empathy. So that if you're wondering, why is this bothering me? And you see it's also bothering us, maybe that's helpful. So we go back and forth, but that one is Grinding My Gears about parent and student behavior. And so that goes live on Friday. And then on Saturday, we have our long form. So we go 5 short form videos in a row. Short form videos really, our longest one ever has been 22 minutes. Our shortest one, I think, was 7 or 8. Long form videos are more like 35 or more. And this is a longer one. This is an interview that I did with one of the preeminent scholars in the country on affirmative action, Julie J. Park. Julie J. Park, she's author of multiple books. She's a esteemed professor at the University of Maryland, the education department. Probably more importantly, she was part of the consulting team in the Harvard affirmative action case. So she was regularly consulted, Harvard versus SFFA, Students for Fair Admissions. And so I really feel like affirmative action is completely misunderstood, and it is totally under assault, especially in this anti-DEI culture. And I felt it needed a robust defense. And I don't know a better person than Julie. So I did a deep dive interview with her on affirmative action. She walks us through every single Supreme Court case, the history. Yeah, so that's going to be on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we're back to our frequently asked question series again. And this is Carter, and Carter's up for this one. And we're talking about what are the pros and what are the cons of early decision. Like, this is a question we get asked a lot. So I'll say one more thing about our videos. Right now, we have 4 series going. And I'm not going to say we're only going to have 4 series because I know how my mind works. I'm likely to think of another series tonight. But we have 4 series, and you'll be able to know what video is in what series moving forward because I've just communicated with Amita, who's managing our YouTube. And there's going to be a little notation on the thumbnail. So if it's in the Grinding My Gears series, you're going to see Grinding My Gears. That's one. Another series we have is Frequently Asked Questions. Then you'll see FAQ right on the thumbnail. Another series we have is Admissions Tips. You'll see tips right on the thumbnail. And the other one is Admissions Trends. You'll see trends. So either tips, trends, Frequently Asked Questions, or Grinding My Gears, or the deeper long form videos. All right, friends. And without any further ado, here is an update on what's going on with us with the YouTube channel, with our new website, and with Instagram. Take a listen. Friends, we are in year 9 of our podcast, but July 21st, 2026 was the most important day of our podcast history. On July 21st, we launched a brand new YourCollegeBoundKid.com website. As soon as an episode goes live, you can now listen on YourCollegeBoundKid.com instantaneously. And as soon as a YouTube video goes live, it is up on the new website. The website is cleaner. Interviews and the spotlights and past episodes are so much easier to navigate. Special shout out to a brother-sister team, Mary LaChance in Connecticut and John Rooney in New York, who, by the way, are volunteering their services to help us make college knowledge available to all and being our webmasters. You have to check out the new YourCollegeBoundKid.com. The feedback so far on the new website has been off the charts. Effusive. Another thing happened on July 21st. We went from a Monday, Thursday, Audible podcast to a daily podcast. We now have YouTube videos that drop every Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. That is every day we don't have an Audible podcast. Most of these videos are between 10 to 20 minutes. But every 6 videos, a long-form video, a deep dive with a thought leader in admissions or higher ed. Our Your College Bound Kid podcast YouTube channel is more than just a place to learn. It's a community forum, and we can use that comment section on YouTube to interact with each other and strengthen our bonds in our community. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Stuck, you're killing me. I mean, I love the pod, but 7 days a week? Are you serious? Thanks to Sony Patel from Kansas City, every one of those 5 days we drop a new YouTube video, she will send out a video trailer on Instagram that will preview the YouTube video that went live earlier that day. So you can take 60 seconds to watch the Instagram video trailer, and then you can decide if the 10 to 20 minute YouTube video is worth your time. Now, if you're not signed up for our Instagram, it's just at YCBK Podcast. That's at YCBK Podcast. One more time, that's at YCBK Podcast. We are excited and we look forward to interacting with you, our listening family, in the comment section on YouTube. Okay, friends, I have one more announcement and I think you're going to like it. So this is how you all help the podcast. So Laura sent in a message and I played it on Monday. And this is about our website. And she said, I love the new website. Love it, love it, love it. But you know one thing that would help me? And I thought it was a very fair request. I like to know the dates of things when I'm looking at a spotlight or an interview. So I reached out to John Rudy, Mary LaChance. Can we make it happen? And guess what, friends? I'm looking at the website right now. Not only are all the dates present for all interviews and all spotlights, but they actually have a button where you can click newest first or oldest first. How cool is that? So you speak up. You know, my old colleague when I first came to KIPP in 2009, she was very country South Carolina, but she had some great phrases, and I borrowed some of them from her. And one of them she used to always say is, closed mouths don't get fed. So Laura was not a closed mouth. She spoke up, and guess what? All of you now are going to get fed. So if you want to know the date, they're right there for you. So I wanted to make that announcement as well. All right. Without any further ado, let's transition to part 2 of 3, where Christina and I are interviewing Andrea Saadi, Municipal Credit Research Analyst. Listen and enjoy.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we've reached part 2 of 3 in the interview Christina and I did with Andrea Saadi. And we're looking at whether or not you can know if colleges are financially stable. So Andrea gives us some things to look for to know whether a college is really in trouble. Andrea shares some of the factors she looks at when she's doing assessment of whether a college is financially stable. Andrea explains why the bond offering data is important and what she looks for when examining bond offering document. And Andrea lets us know when they are available and when they're not available. Andrea lets us know what is the gold standard for looking at financial data. Andrea talks about whether bond ratings get lowered. Is that a concern? Should that be an alarm? And Andrea talks about how to not be an alarmist and rule out a college just because of layoffs or operational deficits. Listen and enjoy.
So if you're a parent who's thinking, you're looking at the college search now, you're putting schools on their list, and say you're looking at a school that has very publicly said that they're in the middle of a budget crisis, how might they assume that that is going to affect their students' experience throughout their 4 years? Like what actually changes for a student when a college is financially strained?
Okay, so if they're going through a budget crisis, they're probably already making some of those budget cuts that are, abrupt and basically cutting things like student services, things that are eroding the student experience, right? So they're probably going to see things like that are extreme reductions in course offerings. Is probably one of the biggest ones. Cutting faculty, larger class sizes, so if that's something that drew the student there, that might change. Outright elimination of a major is a potential risk, right? Just a lot of the things that, the student experience was hinged on. And then yes, that would likely result in sort of the student transferring, graduation timelines being impacted, negatively even impacting just the student outcome or the overall return on the investment. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, and
We've heard.
as I said, like the accreditation risk is probably like the next step or the next concern. But if there's financial crisis happening, it might not take 4 years for that to fully play out. I mean, it's reading the headlines at that point and following as much as you can closely the student newspaper and any of the local news. So while I did say headlines can exaggerate, like when it's a financial crisis like that, and these are the things to look for, these, sort of sharp cuts around, the size of the expense reduction. If you're talking about 1% to 2% of expenses, that's not as large as, 10 or 20% of expenses that have to be cut within months. That's kind of a signal, like very large cuts. Again, whether or not, it's just usually could tell if it's a prudent budget management tactic or not. If they're still investing somewhere, is this college saying, okay, well, we still want to drive enrollment and admissions, so we're going to close this underutilized major over here, but we're going to launch, these other 3 things over here. So it really depends, if management is in a position to be able to show that their actions are going to produce sustainable results. But like when you're at the point where you can't make payroll, that's definitely, you're down pretty far along.
So let's transition, Andrea. This has been a great sort of diagnosis of the plight that schools face. I know another thing that caused you to reach out to me, not only the budget crunch article I read, but I had indicated, which I am going to do, I'm going to visually do something on YouTube. I said to help parents get a sense of financial state of colleges. But what I love about what you do is it's so comprehensive. Because I'm basically going to look at how students can track enrollment trends and how they can track net tuition revenue, which are incredibly important. But your assessment and the Moody's, the S&Ps, you guys look at so many factors when you're preparing your comprehensive overview of the stability of colleges. So can you share with our listeners some of the factors that you look at when you're doing an assessment of the stability of a college, maybe beyond enrollment patterns and net tuition revenue? Like those are incredibly important, but I know from talking with you and looking at S&P and Moody's and some of their models that it goes well beyond just that. So share, and if you want to say something on, I don't want to preclude you from talking about things related to enrollment and revenue because those are so critical. So if you want to go more in depth on that, then feel free to go there as well. But I think our listeners will find it fascinating to know, how do you assess the financial stability of a college? Like what things are you looking at?
Okay. So there's probably about 4 or 5 broad factors that get used, and I'll go over those shortly. But basically, we're looking at, from the professional perspective, it's roughly 5 to 10 years worth of financial statements, admissions data, other key information, as well as the bond offering documents. So these are the documents that govern the issuance of debt. And this evaluation includes calculating somewhere around 20 to 30 quantitative metrics using those financial statements and the things that are disclosed in the bond offering documents, alongside of evaluation of other key quantitative factors. And as I said, there's this series of broad factors, and they're all evaluated holistically and in context, looking for trends and momentum. Hence the reason why we're looking for, many, many years to understand historically, where the college was, where it's going, has it withstood crises before or crunches before, what does just the management and governance picture look like, right? So the series of broad factors, the first one, that we'll often start with is just an assessment of that market position, the demand and the enrollment profile. So the things that, you had, mentioned with respect to selectivity and admissions demand, right? So, at the end of the day, a school with a very strong, stable demand would have very, very strong pricing power and enrollment resilience. And those are key, because if you have declining or volatile enrollment, that's a red flag, because it's tied to revenue durability, right? We're also looking at some of the neat tricks, like, is application growth organic or manufactured. Sometimes you start to scratch your head when, the schools are doing fee waivers, they're removing supplements, they're turning to direct admit. Removing barriers to apply could potentially be a signal in a situation where application growth has stagnated or has declined, and they're trying to boost their applications or, juice their yields or their acceptance rate, right? So
waiving app
again,
fees. Would you put waiving application fees in that list of one of the things?
Maybe. The fee waivers are definitely, I understand the fee waivers for like low income, under resourced, but
Sure.
I think that when it's fee waivers for all, perhaps, like, again, in context, it's not this one factor. It's trying to look at it holistically and understanding what's going on. And did they always waive fees, or are they suddenly moving to test optional? Like everybody went test optional during COVID. Obviously, we're in a area right now where we're heading back in that direction. But like, for example, if a school, if it doesn't make sense that they do remain test optional, or they suddenly decide to go test optional, like that, it's just that removing the barriers to apply. And is that a way for them to potentially is that an enrollment management strategy? And that in and of itself is okay. It's just, we're looking at that, right? It's just something I'm looking at it.
So I've often talked about how schools can manipulate their acceptance rates. I had Willamette, Dean of Admission, talk about all I had on for an interview. And she said, all I have to do is target C and C plus students with student search, your whole campaign that you run. So basically recruit to reject, right? Target students with mailings that we're not going to admit to drive our admit rate down. And then we have schools that it's not as easy now as it used to be, but some schools count an application differently. You fill out a few things and that's an applicant.
Don't include the applications to your satellite campuses, but only include the ones, or your acceptance to your satellite campuses and your acceptance rate, right?
Correct. And then there's all the stuff, of course, with spring admit. There's a lot of things that can be done to juice and manipulate your acceptance rate. And so we
look, I just look at everything skeptically, right? That's because that's what I'm trained to do. So to me, that's how I look at it initially. And then I try to, prove me wrong, or let me find other strengths that offset this particular thing. But again, it's just another factor. It's a giant rubric. It is so similar to college admissions in the whole scheme of things. So, that's that piece of it, is the demand stability, right? Then there's the enrollment stability, right? So, are they filling the freshman class? What is the freshman?
So my question for you was, are you able to see through when schools are manipulating their acceptance rate? Like, do you feel you have enough tools to suss that out, or is that so subtle that I can't really tell when you're assessing?
It's usually not it's more a sense than it is like reading the data, because usually in the public disclosure that's provided to, an investor, they are not going to highlight in a paragraph above it, this is our enrollment strategy. We have decided to do X, Y, and Z. I will hear or see or do a Google search separately on the side outside of the documents that are provided to me, the 10 years of applications, and try to understand, that's interesting. Year over year, applications went up 35%. Why is that? And I ask those questions separately through maybe some sort of, again, a Google search, or if I have the opportunity, depending on the role that I'm in, and I have the opportunity to ask management questions, then that will be included in my due diligence with management, asking these very same questions. So it all depends, but it is generally just a sense of doing this for 20 years and understanding, it would seem odd that for a particular school year over year, their applications, bounced so substantially. We saw it during COVID when all the schools went test optional, and, it's like everybody decided that they were going to throw in an application to Stanford and the Ivies and all that other stuff. And those application numbers have started to level off or fall off. And we'll probably see it more and more as there's several years worth of data now that they've gone back to requiring tests, because it hasn't been even throughout through those entities. So it takes a couple of years for the patterns to develop and to draw logical conclusions from them. But it's more like just a sense or a gut feeling, especially as you're going through and reading the rest of the documentation and understanding what kind of school this is. It's fully understandable if the school had, a team in the Final Four, or they just, they're a big football team and there was a win and they, like those schools, you can kind of understand the application growth, but those are not the ones that like we're really talking about here from the, identifying concerns.
So I want to follow up with
application growth
something
is
you
more
said.
organic.
So a couple times you referenced looking at bond data. Can you elaborate on that and explain what you're looking at and why that's helpful in your assessment of a school's stability?
I'm looking at the bond offering documents. So
Correct.
Those are
explain what that is and why that's helpful. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Sure. Okay, so these are available basically only if an entity issues public debt. So not every college that exists has bond offering documents. And if they have loans outstanding, they could be in the private space. So they could have been just with a bank, and they're not like actual securities that are fixed income loan bonds traded in the public market, right? So the bond offering document is going to contain lots and lots of information. It's usually several hundred pages long. And inside of it, is an entire section that has information, very, very detailed information about enrollment, admissions, tuition, housing, capital plans, governance, operations, debt, future projects, which again ties to its capital plans. And then the securities law requires that this information is updated. It's known in the industry as continuing disclosure. And updates to that information then must be posted publicly somewhere. And so basically the universities or anyone who issues debt in this space would have to agree that they're going to publish their annual financials and operating information. This is typically filed, and there's the documents govern what the deadline is for filing that. So there's no universal package of what's provided annually, but industry practice commonly includes at least the audited financials and an update of that operating data that was included in the offering documents.
All right, Christina, I know you have a question. If not, I have one. So yeah.
I just want to know what documents are publicly available to families to review. I know there's information about financial aid and enrollment and all of those trends in the common data set, but outside of that, what documents would families need in order to see these trends? What's available to them and how would they use them?
And can they interpret them? Yeah. The families know how to properly interpret them.
I think that's the more challenging part. The documents exist mostly, and it's knowing, I guess, where to find them, but there's a lot to look for. So again, not every college and university issues debt. So the ones that do, it is much easier to find the information because it is publicly available. The gold standard for any analysis, though, regardless of whether or not debt is outstanding, is the audited financial statements, right? So most colleges do produce these, but it's not necessarily publicly available. You could probably try to find them on a university's website. You can probably try to Google for them. You can probably reach out to the university and see if they post them. They're typically released or completed within 180 days of a college's fiscal year end. So they are going to be backwards looking. Colleges and universities, their fiscal year end typically is June 30th. So you typically wouldn't get fiscal 26 numbers until around, October to December of this year, if they even are producing them publicly and if they're available. But despite the fact that they're the best source of financial information, they need interpretation, right? They're not written for a consumer audience. They use nonprofit accounting concepts. It's not intuitive. And in addition to the actual balance sheet, income statement, cash flow statement, there's pages and pages of footnotes or notes to the financial statements that disclose lots and lots of important risks. And that's probably where someone like myself spends most of the time, is looking through all of the footnotes and all of the disclosures to really fully understand and assess the risks that are not necessarily apparent in, an income statement, which is going to, show the revenues, the expenses, whether or not there was a profit or a deficit, It's digging through the notes to also, understand some of the nuance behind it. That's where all of the information on their debt and their amortization schedule, like how their debt is paid off, whether or not that debt is fixed or variable rate, like all of those risks are in there. Whether like all of the liquidity information is also going to be in the audited financial statements. How much of their endowment or just their corpus of net assets is restricted versus unrestricted. That's, a huge metric that I would follow and care about, because it's understanding, the size of the balance sheet is the capacity, but how much of that is available to be used for operations or in emergencies or those types of things.
So let me ask you this, because I understand Christina's question, which is we have a very curious listenership, but we can frustrate them if the answer we're giving them is too complex for you to understand. So this is really bad out there, and they're going to leave frustrated. So I thought it was incredibly helpful for you to talk about, look at the school newspaper, look at the local area newspaper. We talk about that a lot, but it's nice to hear that from other voices. That's something practical and tangible that people can do, right? They can follow the school newspaper. They can follow the local newspaper. For our audience is mostly parents, for any schools that their students considering. What are your thoughts on bond ratings? Like, hate to put Barnard on blast over there, Christina, but they got the rate lowered, didn't they recently? Am I correct about that? Rumor has it
They did. They sure did.
Yeah.
They
So
did.
like,
and very publicly stated they have a $265 million deficit, right?
See?
So how does
that's a big number.
It's a big number, followed by
Yes.
layoffs and other hiring freezes. So when you see those headlines, like how does that play out? Like what do you look for?
And Barnard is the most selective women's college in the country. So that kind of freaks people out. Here's the most selective women's college in the country with a $265 million budget deficit. Like, like the public hears that and they're like, whoa. Like, who's safe out here?
Mm-hmm.
So how should someone interpret that without maybe being an alarmist and going all the way to the extreme?
So, right, and I don't have the financials in front of me, but I guess looking at the magnitude of that deficit, right? So relative to the size of the operating expenses itself. So sometimes that deficit could be, less than 5%. But if that's, a 20% deficit, then that's a much more substantial, right? It's the magnitude. And, is that one time or is that recurring? Has there been a series of operating deficits over the past couple of years? If there have been, then how have those deficits been addressed? And if the deficits are a pattern or a trend and they are recurring, then, it looks like whatever management is doing is not sufficient. And when you have a deficit, it has to be closed somewhere. So that means that financial reserves are probably being depleted unless there's, some philanthropic fundraise or something to come in to close that deficit or add to the reserves. But what is the confidence level that next year it's not going to end up in the same place, right? So it's just looking at, like, again, trends, magnitude, the pace. Can that deficit this year, is it one time? Can it be attributed to a handful of things? I think there's schools that have undergone in the past year. 2025 was rough with all of the changes that the Trump administration threw at the schools, and they incurred a substantial amount of legal fees trying to fight the administration. They had the drop in international enrollment that in that one year, in that one fiscal year, they were unable to correct quickly. But if you can explain all that, and again, it was a one time, and the following year, you can sort of strip out those extenuating circumstances like, okay, well, we don't anticipate having those legal fees next year, and we're going to be back to normal on enrollment, international enrollment, or we figured out a way to, close that gap by doing these XYZ revenue enhancers. We've added this program, we've brought in, we've raised tuition, like whatever the school is doing, and you feel like there's certainty that they have achieved budget balance or budget stability, then if that operating deficit can be explained away, then it's not as alarming. It's just really, what is the trend? What is the pattern? What is the go forward plan? And maybe right now for a particular school, it's in the midst of that, and it's uncertain as to whether or not, there is a path forward in terms of enrollment stability and cash flow certainty and reserves, exists, like substantial reserves exist to cover outstanding debt and operations, then it's less of a concern. But it's like, what is the pace or trend of that deterioration? Is it a large amount year over year? Because that's when the crunch then becomes the crisis, right? And then you have some other exogenous shock that suddenly, they can't handle because they don't have the cash flow or the liquidity. Especially if, you've got it's great if a school has a lot of endowment or a lot of resources, but if it's all restricted or depending on how they operate or manage their endowment, they could have, a bunch of capital calls that are required as part of their investments in private equity in and of itself, and hedge funds and other investments, which might be very high return for them, are also illiquid in terms of the ability to access them quickly to be able to fund a budget crunch. The larger universities and the wealthier ones also have access to the capital market, so they could quickly tap the market for a line of credit. They can issue commercial paper. They can do a handful of things that, it is effectively issuing more debt, but it's sort of short-term debt to bridge a liquidity issue, because they have the money. It's just tied up somewhere in their investments.
So Andrea, you've talked a lot about athletics, because a lot of times athletics, the way it's covered a lot of times is the schools like University of Texas, Michigan, that have these $200 million athletic budgets, but they bring in big money through boosters and, apparel sales and TV revenue contracts. And a lot of times when you hear the national coverage of athletics, it's accentuating, quote unquote, the institutions that are being successful. But there's another side of it. And you've spoken up about like athletics and the relationship with tuition discounting and colleges becoming too dependent on athletics, and what happens when you make this big bet in facilities and all this, and then you're not a successful program, and the financial, revenues do not surpass the expenses. So talk to us a little bit about athletics, because I know it's a big part of what you assess and the role it plays in this.
Yeah. So, and you're absolutely right. Like, athletics that's being used as an enrollment management tool is not inherently problematic in and of itself, right? But when you have some of the smaller universities, particularly the private ones, that are already exhibiting, weaker demand factors, they've got that high or growing discount rate already, and they don't have substantial wealth or financial resources, I really want to look closer into that athletics program, right? So, how many sports teams are there, and what % of the student body are varsity athletes? Those are some easy things to quickly assess on a website. If you have a small school and they've got tons and tons of athletics, you can ask yourself, or like, athletic teams are expensive, right? They're expensive to maintain. They're typically not going to be accretive to the university's net income or its primary mission of education at the smaller D3 level, right? The athletic teams themselves, right, require a lot of significant investment in facilities. And these facilities are often financed with debt. And they also require a lot of overhead, personnel, travel expenses, right, just to name a few. So when you just take all of that into account, you start to just take a look, underneath that, like, if the university is under enrollment pressure, there's a chance that they are heavily discounting recruited athletes, right, just to fill rosters and beds. And as enrollment increases, you're looking at whether or not net tuition revenue is proportionally increasing. Then basically you have this concern that the colleges are becoming too dependent on athletic recruiting to sustain their entire enrollment base. So, when you get above 50%, 55% of your school is varsity athletes, that's potentially a flag to take a look at. Again, in combination with whether or not there's a lot of high tuition discounting, very low yield, like sub 15% yield. Or, did suddenly year over year, these numbers, shift, and did they, suddenly, add a team, right? So some of the warning signs would be, like a rapid proliferation of sports, like they're suddenly launching or introducing a handful of sports, or the roster sizes are just unusually large, right? And unnecessarily so. And
Friends, this concludes part 2 of 3. We hope you join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode, Chris Tier is here, and he is doing a little bit of a 3-parter for me. It's one of those things where I said, Chris, let's record a segment. And then I thought it was really good, so I just let it go and go and go and go and go. And now it's into the three-tier category, because we did bounce around. We start out with a question from a listener, and it's from a dad in Denver. His name's Joe. He's got 2 daughters, and he had a great question. So Chris and I will take that question on Monday, and then you'll hear Chris over the next 2, I was going to say weeks, over the next 2 episodes as well. So we get into a number of different things, including we do a hot topic in the news on Caltech's fraud department. Check it and make sure people aren't embellishing their applications. And then we have that conversation that I told you we'd have about why are these schools getting rid of these custom prompts, and just want to come at it again and see if we've covered all angles of this thing. So you'll hear that over the next 3 weeks. And then you'll hear part 3, the final part, with Andrea Saadi, our municipal credit research analyst, on Monday. And friends, I can't help but think, after that quote I read you in The Big Number, I can't help but think of a couple quotes that are kind of percolating in my mind. And taking you back to my book, as you guys know, I put my 10 favorite quotes back in my book. I wrote this book a while ago, and they still resonate with me just as much today as they did back in 2016 when I was writing this book. And so here's one I want to read to you. It's a quote from Frank Bruni's book, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. For too many parents and their children, getting into a highly selective school isn't just another challenge, just another goal. A yes or no from Amherst or Dartmouth or Duke or Northwestern is seen as the conclusive measure of a young person's worth. A binding verdict on the life that he or she has led up until that point. An incontestable harbinger of the success or disappointments to come. Winner or loser, this is when the judgment is made. This is the great, brutal culling. What madness and what nonsense. Frank Bruni, author of Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about YCBK on social media, and you help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating at yourcollegeboundkid.com and clicking the donate button. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. If you have a question or suggestion, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak, and we will do our best to get your question or your comment in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I'm the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admission and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, 2 admission officers from Colorado, Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Kate Strickland from CU Boulder, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, Heath Einstein, the Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU in Fort Worth, Carter DeLauro, a co-director of college counseling in New York, and Christina Lopez, the former Dean of Admission at Barnard College, and our international college specialist, Kevin Newton from Dallas, Texas. Our stupendous sound engineer who makes everything happen is Nemanja Matvic from Serbia. Our reliable webmaster is John Rooney. Website updates are done by Joy Stucker. Image editing by Vlad Honchar. And what would we do without our volunteers? Guy Pillsbury, Sony Patel, and Andy Bernstein are all helping us with podcast marketing. Carolyn Wood, Mark Doniger, and Carrie Roberts book interviews with thought leaders. Amanda Dugan, Colleen Sinoki, Nicole Resch, Trevor Smith, Ryan Stepler and Lynn Labash send thank yous to interviewees. If you want a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcosbounkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly newsletter, YCBK Plus, it's also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights and our upcoming events and receptions. And you can now do searches for past content by using our new Explore and Topics tabs. We really encourage you to explore our past content. We have close to 1,000 hours. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.